also said he, quote, dreaded, this is a quote, hearing about the Christian roots of Europe. Oh, it's so horrible, because to him, they take on a colonialist overtone. So let's demonize Europe more. Well, this is Europe that's being colonized now. And he called on European nations to, quote, integrate Muslim migrants into the continent. When Saudi Arabia won't take one of the refugees that are really jihadis that failed to invade Syria, failed to take it over, they're being kicked out now through Turkey into Europe by the Russians and others. And they're not going back to Saudi Arabia or Qatar or other countries because they are basically the detritus that's been dumped on Syria, dumped on Turkey, and now dumped on Europe. This integration is all the more necessary today, quoting the false pope, since as a result of selfish search for well-being, Europe is experiencing the grave problem of declining birth rate. He stated a demographic emptiness is developing. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, not only did a lot of the men go become priests, they then became pedophiles. So that's another problem of the dying demographics. His opinions are stunningly similar to those of top Imam Aid, who said Muslims should exploit the migrant crisis to breed with Europeans and conquer their countries. We have all the links in the article. Because of time, I'm not going to play them here today. Now let's move on. Let's look at other wondrous things that are being brought here to undermine and collapse the nation state. The multinationals have already collapsed the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia, to a great extent. Now they're bringing in the most unskilled, diseased people from Eastern Europe, Middle East, you name it, to further weigh down the country and bankrupt it. That's why the Colt M16-223 was developed. I guess they call it 5.56 now in the Army, because the bullet's so small but so fast, it fragments and doesn't usually kill you, but wounds you horribly. And they admitted that that was to get around NATO not allowing soft point bullets, but full metal jacket. And so it's an anti-personnel bullet that maims and causes 5 or 6 people to have to take care of them. And that's what Cloward and Piven is, the strategy to bankrupt the economy, bankrupt the country, have people so dependent and so sick and dumbed down that the whole system collapses. That's how you conquer the nation. Then you come in and change the policies once you've done it. Here's a story out of Breitbart using U.S. government numbers. 22% of resettled refugees in Minnesota test positive for tuberculosis, much of it drug-resistant TB, a death sentence. Continuing, they don't let anybody like that, though, into the Vatican that has 200-foot walls. And then there's another story out of the Star Tribune. After 20 years of decline, tuberculosis inches up in the U.S. So we've got to wear spacesuits once we know it's around us, but we don't test the immigrants coming in like we did 100 years ago at Ellis Island. This is a nation, a culture being designed for suicide. And speaking of cultural suicide, we are going to play a short clip of this. This is a person who admits he's a pedophile. Here's the headline. Salon reports this. I'm a pedophile, but not a monster. The new civil right is to have somebody pay for your sex change. The new civil right is to have somebody pay for your abortion. And he goes on to talk about reports of, hanging out with a 5-year-old girl he's babysitting. But he's so virtuous, he didn't do anything. It just goes on and on. According to Nickerson, at age 18, he babysat a 5-year-old girl and fell in love with her. Since he never wanted to act on his urges, he chose privately to relieve himself. And it just goes on. They've written scores of articles at Salon the last few years promoting pedophilia and selling it like it's just loving. And we have government in the U.S. saying, we're going to give your kids inoculations because they consent, or abortions because they consent. The age of consent is 18. If you have sex with a 10-year-old or give them drugs, and just because they said they wanted to have sex or use drugs, you have raped them or you have drugged them and contributed to the delinquency of a minor. You have violated their rights to grow up and develop a free will. And to have the state and the media and others promoting this like it's a good idea is totally, absolutely sickening, because if they can get away with promoting pedophilia, they can do anything. Let's play a clip right now.
babysitting gig. She was 5. She was a precocious girl. She was advanced for her age. She was also very independent. A lot of my fantasies actually revolve around little girls who are in some way more powerful than I am. Eventually, my attraction became, overwhelming to the point I had to go relieve myself in the bathroom.
What we're witnessing here is the absolute mainlining of evil. Because if they can get you to accept ISIS flooding Europe or pedophiles saying they're loving, good, upright people and are virtuous, and openly advertise that, the sky is the limit. Now, I've got other articles here that I'll be covering tomorrow on the radio, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., but here's the bottom line. The globalists want to conquer the world, but they know that tyrants have always fallen. So they want to short-circuit common sense and short-circuit the family and any type of fealty where people are territorial and stand up for themselves. We're not being domesticated to enter some wondrous future Star Trek world where we all live in peace and colonize deep space. We're being domesticated like I guess you would cut the legs off a guinea pig and pull the teeth out of a guinea pig you wanted to feed to a prize boa constrictor to make sure it didn't scratch or bite the boa when it was about to eat it. We're being defanged and dehorned so that these cosmic con artists, these cosmic pedophiles, these cosmic pieces of degenerate filth can have their ways with us. We are being farmed. We are being prepared for the dinner table of the globalists, and every ounce of my core humanity stands against it. This has been another edition of Teleprompter Free News, produced right here in Austin, Texas. God bless you all. Great job with the crew. Please spread the word about this transmission because the establishment does not want anybody to be aware of these actual facts we're breaking down. See you back tomorrow.
And welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm Joe Biggs, and joining me today, former Navy SEAL Carl Higbie. How you doing today, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
Hey, so I wanted to talk to you more in depth this time about your book, Enemies Foreign and Domestic, A SEAL's Story. It starts off with you on the tarmac, and you are actually getting ready to go out on this mission to capture the Butcher of Fallujah. Let's break down from the tarmac on into the actual apprehension of him. Let's get into depth about that if you can.
Well, actually, the operation we start off in Enemies Foreign and Domestic was not the one we were going to get, the Butcher of Fallujah, but that was rather on my first deployment. That was back when it was actually we were fighting the war to win, and the rules of engagement weren't so restrictive. So it was a little bit different operation. But did you want to go into the operation or the Butcher of Fallujah first?
Yeah, let's go into the Butcher of Fallujah first. I think that'd be a good one.
All right, so this guy, everybody knows they've seen American Sniper. Scott McEwen, the author of American Sniper, wrote my foreword to this book. And this guy is featured in that movie as the Butcher. Now, he was a bad dude. We'd been looking for him for quite some time. One of our officers, our SEAL officers, actually found him, which was miraculous. We surveilled him for a little while. We finally got approval to go get this bad guy, because up to that point, our chain of command had been denying us the ability to go get almost any terrorist we put on the target deck. We found him, went to prosecute him. Flawless operation, kicked in the door in the middle of the night. He had a gun on target. The hero of the op, Matt McCabe, was able to subdue him, and without a shot fired, because you never want to fire a shot because it wakes up the whole neighborhood, and now you're in a big gunfight. And so we got him down, not a scratch on him. We bring him back to base, put him in the Connex box, which was our detention facility, under the supervision of a Master at Arms, which is an MP, a military police. And he left his post. And during that time, this terrorist, Abid Asham, he bit his lip, as testified by an oral surgeon, spit blood on himself, and claimed we abused him.
Yeah, that kind of stuff happens. I mean, what's going through your mind, though? I mean, you get called out. You find out that you're going to be part of this mission, one of the most wanted men in the Middle East at that time. What's going through your mind? What are your emotions? I mean, your heart's got to be pumping. You've got to be super excited to be part of something like this, to take out someone who has been killing a lot of people, right?
Right, and absolutely, and that was why we actually put a number of attempted operations against this guy in the past, and our chain of command had shot it down. And now we were so 100% sure, and we went above our chain of command and submitted this. So it was a great thing to be a part of. I mean, we as a team, we worked incredibly well together. We prosecuted the target. We brought him back without a shot fired. By all intents and purposes, it was a flawless operation.
Well, I want to get more into what we kind of talked to briefly in this first segment earlier. about the changing of the military. You know, we have 3 deaths linked to recent Navy SEAL training classes. And my fear is due to this entire PC nature that we have right now, the fact that we have a leadership now that is actually following this political correct lifestyle all of a sudden. I have a fear that there's going to end up being a drop in standards in SEAL training, in SF training, as far as Green Berets, Rangers, things like that. And that's going to affect our future missions when we try to go out after these bad guys, because like you said earlier, the enemy doesn't drop their standards, but for some reason, our leadership is having us do this. Now, why do you think some of these deaths are happening? And do you think that it could eventually get to a point where they might start dropping standards for these elite soldiers?
Well, there was a phase where they did drop standards in BUDS, and they've since corrected it for the most part. But what's wrong now is you have a politically correct push within the military, and a lot of good SEALs are getting out. They just can't put up with the rules of engagement anymore. They can't put up with the BS. That's not what they joined for. So they're losing good guys. And Congress and other military leaders have mandated more SEALs be put in. So what you have is while great men and women, no doubt, they're being pushed into training now that maybe they shouldn't be in. Maybe the screening process has gotten slightly more lenient. Maybe the initial screening process should be more stringent as it was when I went through. It was almost impossible to qualify for these things with all the tests. I mean, if you had flat feet, you couldn't get in. Now they've relaxed not necessarily the physical standard, but the criteria in order to make the cut. And then what's happening is these guys, still great men, women, are going through training, and now they're getting hurt in training. They're getting, and there are some statistics that support the opposite of this. But I mean, as you're seeing in the press, guys are dying in training. And the fact is that these people aren't screened as well as they used to be, and they're slipping through the cracks. And the problem is also, once you graduate the program, sometimes, occasionally, they're getting to the team and they're getting further screened, just like as everybody else has, and they're not making the cut there either. So you're still getting the same number of SEALs to a deployable state. You're just losing far more because of politics.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous when you think about it, how they do that stuff. And I mean, yeah, people are going to die in training because, when I was watching the documentary last night about Navy SEALs, they wanted to get that training as close to combat scenarios as possible. That way, when you actually have to go and engage in that atmosphere, that you would be at that tier 1 level ready to operate, it's unfortunate it does happen, but I want to get your opinion on something else. Air Force General is first woman at top tier U.S. Combat Command. This has been a big topic across the country the past few weeks. Michael Savage, I've seen it on Fox, other stations as well, where people are concerned about women being put in combat roles and then also without any combat experience, taking these leadership positions as well and leading elite soldiers into these combat missions. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the issue here is you have a woman now in charge of a combat unit, but women haven't been allowed in combat for long enough for her to have the experience to run a combat operation. So I think that it's putting our troops at a detriment here. And look, you have the don't ask, don't tell policy, which destabilized a large number of people in the military. I mean, if I was commander-in-chief today, I would not reinstitute the don't ask, don't tell, because it would add more instability. But I wouldn't have taken it out in the first place. And that's what you have, is this social experiment where everyone's equal and everybody gets their own way to do things. You can wear a turban now. Women can be in combat. There'll be SEALs. The problem is you're destabilizing a thing where the margins are so razor thin, and it's just not worth it.
I mean, I feel like it's a psychological thing. When you have men who have trained their entire lives, who have held themselves to that high standard, who have fought day in and day out, beaten their bodies, suppressed their emotions from combat, and to go out here and then to almost feel like they're being used, like you said earlier, as they're part of this social experiment, that's got to have a huge psychological toll on these elite soldiers as well.
A massive psychological toll. And the other thing, too, is the same groups that are advocating for equal women's rights and equal everything, equal everybody, are the same people who are now complaining because they're considering putting women in for the draft. Now, if women are truly equal, why do we have different standards? Why do we have them not registered for the draft? Why do we have male and female sports team? If everybody's equal, let's just make it all equal across the board. But the fact is, we're not. And I know that some feminists out there are going to freak out, but the fact of the matter is most women are not as strong as most men. And that's just science. It's not like I could physically not birth a baby. That is the reality of it. But you cannot start making social experiments out of the one force that is solely responsible for the entire defense of the United States and our way of life.
I mean, what do you think that the enemy is doing right now, sitting over there? There's enemy here, obviously.